Okay. So Jan, are you seeing more attendees come in?
Yes, 21, 23.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are going to get this started in just a moment, but we are taking a few seconds to let our participants come in. So give us a few and we will get started. Okay, I see it's popping up. Give it a few more seconds.
Such a beautiful day. I hate to even be inside right now.
I know. It is a gorgeous day. Well, Jan, it looks like it slowed down just a little bit, so I want to go ahead and get started, and people will still be coming in. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Spring Gardening Webinar Series presented by the Central Oregon Master Gardeners, Oregon State University, and our sponsors. And thank you for joining us on this beautiful April day. If I wasn't doing this, I would be outside in my yard because it's just gorgeous outside. My name's Vicky Miner, and I am your host today, and I am being assisted by Jan Even, another master gardener. And our presenter is Vicky Kemp, and she is talking this morning about the benefits of using raised beds, recommended size and spacing, and types of materials to use. She will also cover orientation of raised beds, which is pretty important, to maximize heat from the sun, soil types, drainage, efficient irrigation practices, use of timers, and protection from burrowing rodents, another bane of our existence in Central Oregon. She has saved time at the end for your questions, so you can put questions in the Q&A, and that's my segue to housekeeping. All of the videos and the microphones are off, except for the presenters and the two of us, the two master gardeners assisting. If you have questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and please put your question in there, and we will reserve time at the end to answer anything that was not addressed during the slide presentation. This is being recorded, and it will be available online for a short period of time following the session. And a few days after the session's finished, you'll get an email with a link to access the video. So Vicky has been growing food since the 1970s in different locations in Oregon. And as you probably know by now, Central Oregon presents some very unique challenges for growing food. Vicky's had many successes and failures doing this, but since completing her certification for the OSU Master Gardener in 2009, her successes have increased. Some of the vegetable gardening knowledge she learned prompted her to design and assist in construction of her own raised beds for vegetable gardening. And she did that in 2015 and 16, and you will be the beneficiaries of many of the photos that she has taken of her garden. And we use them quite a bit as examples in our vegetable gardening sessions. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Vicky, and she is going to lead us from here. So Vicky, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for attending. It looks like we have 72 people now, and I think we'll go ahead and get started.
So Jan, you want to go ahead and kill your video and your audio, please?
All right, can you see that? Yes.
Yes, we can see that. You're good.
Okay, so this is class is raised bed vegetable gardening and irrigation systems. And since you know, these photos that you'll see, they're from my raised beds. There's other varieties that you can do. You just have to be creative. And it's going to depend on your budget also and what size space you have. So the benefits of using raised beds for vegetable gardening. The soil is warmer by 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And I know this because I used to just have a garden. My garden was just out in the flat with buried soaker hose on the open ground. And I take the temperature out there and monitor it. And then the year I put the raised beds in 2016, finished those, I was just shocked at how much warmer it is. So for Central Oregon, that's definitely a benefit. But it's much easier to manage during your planting, your weeding, your harvesting and clean out by having it not down on the low ground where you can sit on the edge of the raised bed. You can move around with the wheelbarrow. And then the other thing is you have less soil compaction because you're not walking in areas that one year you might be planting and another year not be the walkway in between rows. So you're not walking inside your raised bed, obviously, because there's no need for it. And then it's easier with a raised bed to exclude burrowing rodents. If you have a lot of rodents burrowing in your yard out in the open, you're going to probably have them in your raised beds. So you can put barrier cloth. There's several different varieties to put that inside the bottom and up to the sides a little bit. So orientation of the beds. I thought about this for 2 years while I was thinking of how to do my layout and design. So my recommendation is the beds run north to south. And the whole reason for that is when the sun rises in the morning on the east side, the whole east side of that raised bed is going to get a little heat from that sun. Of course, midday, the sun is directly above and it's going down onto the whole length of the raised bed. And then in the afternoon, the sun is hitting the west side of the raised bed. So that whole side is heating up a little bit. So the spacings between the beds, well, let's back up one. Maximum of 3 feet wide. I went to that because I know that years ago we did some raised beds in the Boys and Girls Club in Redmond. We worked with them and we helped build them, and they were 4 foot wide. Well, guess what? With the 6-year-olds, they couldn't obviously reach the middle of a 4 foot wide bed. So the master gardeners had to do all the work in the middle. But I also realized that you're leaning over a lot more when you're working in your garden if it's 4 feet wide. So even if I'm tall, I'm 5'11", I like the 3 foot wide because I can sit on the edge of my raised bed and just put my arm out and reach the middle without bending my lower back. So as you get older, that lower back, you know, you put more pressure on it when you're leaning over all the time. So that's why I came up with that 3 foot thing. You can go wider, but you've got to think about the consequences of wider. If you just have one raised bed, it probably doesn't really matter. But if you have lots of raised beds like mine, you'll see a picture here soon. I really like the 3 foot wide. The spacing between the beds. Now, mine are 4 feet wide, all the spacing between and around the ends of the beds. That way, if I have plants that are growing up and out to the sides of the raised bed, I can still get my big wheelbarrow up and down and turn around and for whether I'm doing weeding, harvesting, or clean out. And it's very convenient having that nice wide space. Recommendations are to use untreated long-lasting woods such as Western red cedar or Western juniper. There's many other things you can use for raised beds. And there's all kinds of kits now that are up for sale at all the different stores and online, but they can get really expensive. There's metal ones, people use metal, they use recycled materials. You can go to one of those places and get recycled stuff and save a little money that way. And then I don't have hardware cloth on mine. because they're deep enough. I don't really need to exclude burrowing rodents because the depth of them. So if you have a more shallow one, you definitely would probably consider that if you need it or not. So here's my raised beds. There's 5 of them, 3 by 22 foot long. You can see there's a lot of space in between the two. This is actually the red cedar that was my back deck that was getting so worn out with a lot of knot holes had fallen through, and it wasn't, we couldn't really treat it anymore. So we took all that out, put in the Trex on our deck, and then this wood was all recycled. And my husband was the main construction person. I just helped a little. But then I also have the shredded juniper chips that are free because they have the fuel reduction management program in the neighborhood I'm in at Pal Butte. And that really helps keeps the weeds down. And then you're not scurrying around in the dirt all the time too by having that. And I like having that 2x6 on the top edge of each raised bed. That way I can sit along the edge of that when I'm working in the bed itself. And a lot of times just use my little kneeling pad to sit on and work along there as I'm either planting, weeding, harvesting, or cleaning out. So here's one end of one of the raised beds. There's the raised bed, the 3 foot wide and 22 foot length, height about 18 inches, and then topped with the 2x6 inch boards. But you can see the riser, there's a buried line about 4 inches away from the end of the raised bed, and it's buried so I don't trip on it and hit it with the wheelbarrow and eventually break it or whatever. So it's really nice having that out of the way. And you can see those little clips, they keep the riser in place so it doesn't move around and get broke or something. And then it goes underneath the board. There's a little notch underneath that board where the main line goes into the raised bed itself. And then you attach either soaker hose or emitter hose. Here's a close-up of the main line coming into the raised bed. And each raised bed has its own cutoff valve. So sometimes, you know, the soaker hose, the water flows really fast or really slow. And then the emitter hose are a little bit different. And you can adjust that. So if you realize for whatever you're growing in that one raised bed that you want, reduce the amount of water coming through that little valve there, then you can adjust that with a notch. It's very handy. Or if you have one raised bed planted and the rest aren't planted yet, and you don't need the water in the other ones yet, you just shut them down all the way and you're not wasting water that way. Our recommendations is using a raised bed mix that is designed for good drainage. A lot of the local places now have that, and they're specific to that. They come with really nice ingredients, and you can even see that on the website when you go review it, what is actually in there. And most of them would start out with including some compost in it. And the one I got locally did have compost. So I didn't add any compost for at least 3 years and things did just fine. But it's the drainage. You want to make sure you have drainage. So if you're using like metal for a raised bed, you need to really think about what kind of drainage and where it's going. And then prior to planting your raised bed, water 1 to 2 weeks ahead of planting to condition the soil to improve the water absorption. So if it's raining a lot that time of the year, mid-May into late May or so, then you just need to test out, fill your soil, dig it up a little and see what kind of moisture is in it. If it's really dry, you really need to start watering it way before you plant, just to condition the soil is what it does. Otherwise, sometimes it will try to repel it and just sit on top and not go down. So on your irrigation system, the real focus is design and provide the roots with even, consistent, adequate moisture. So the plants don't absorb the water through the top of the leaf or the stem or the fruit. They need to get it down to the roots. And the various varieties are of different watering systems, of course, is a drip emitters or micro sprays. I don't have a picture of that because I don't use them, but in my vegetable garden, but those can get really expensive, but they're really direct. They go right to each individual plant. And you can make adjustments. But then once it's not as convenient to change year from year when you're rotating your crops in your raised beds. But they are very efficient. They work good, and you don't get that much water onto the leaf material of the plant, and still getting the water to the roots. Now, emitter hose, that's what the picture is there, because I like using that. This one here, the holes you can see they're about 12 inches apart, but they come in different size, different spacing on those holes. Sometimes they're 6 inches, sometimes they're 8. You just have to go do your shopping and research on that, depending on what you want to grow. Soaker hoses, they're less expensive than emitter hoses. I use some of those in my raised bed, but you can have a brand new soaker hose and hook it up and they can still have pinholes in it. Sometimes they come that way, and that's just the way they are. But they're definitely cheaper than the emitter hose. The emitter hose you see in this picture, I've had that out there, going on, will be the 7th year, and we haven't had to replace any parts of that. They're very durable. And it comes in a 50-foot roll, maybe different size rolls now, but you would get that at a specialized irrigation place. And then overhead sprinklers, that's probably the cheapest variety. I started my garden out there in '94 in my yard out here at Powell Butte. And I had a cinder block thing about 18 inches high, put that in the smack middle of the garden and put the sprinkler thing on top of that and had a hose hook up and manually turned it off and on every day or however many days I watered. But man, you sure get a lot of weeds that way. So it's very inexpensive, but you're going to use the most water that way, and you're going to have a lot more weeds. So I kind of went over some of this comparison in my description already, and I don't think I need to go over it. But the thing I want to point out is your overhead sprinklers, you're going to have the most water and create the most weeds. So use of timers, they work really good. A simple timer, that's what you're seeing here. That's our timer there. We probably had that one 10 years or more. And you just take it off every year when you're not using it, put it away in the garage. And they're very cheap, $20 or $30 now, I think. And it would go on your main line to your water source. You don't need a timer on each individual bed. That's why you have those adjustment valves on each bed itself. So timers, they vary a lot. This one here, it has you can have 2 or 3 settings per day, 7 days of the week. So you can do all kinds of different things, but you just have to experiment, read the instructions, experiment with what works for you. It's going to depend on how fast your soil is going to drain the water itself, what the temperatures in the soil is like, what the temperature in the air is like, how much wind there is, things like that. So you just have to, this would be really good to be taking notes on that once you set it up, what's working or what's not working, and then make adjustments. There's complex timers, and they would normally have an electric source to it rather than just a battery. And then some even have smart controllers, but those types can get really expensive really quick. You just have to do your research on that when you're thinking about which kind you want. So, and the other thing is your timer, you should set it what you think is the right setting, and then go test it. Dig up the soil and see how deep the water is getting down, see if you need to add or decrease the water settings. And then throughout the season, you should be adjusting it to to reflect the change in the weather, and also the size of the plants, how they're growing. The bigger the plant, they might need a little more water. So this is how I prepare my bed. Normally, even before this part, I would just take the hose out all the way out, lay it on the ground, and then just turn the top layer of, about 6 inches down with just a shovel, just turn it over lightly just to fluff it up, because it sat there all winter long with rain and snow and stuff on it. So after I do that, then I would dig the little trench with a little hose. You can see that in the photo, and then just lay the hose in it. And then you can see with my hands, then I kind of bury that emitter hose and then get ready to plant, whether I'm planting seeds or transplants would be a little bit different. I'll explain that here in a minute. So, but see how also the difference of working like this compared to if it was all on the ground flat. It's very different posture and the way you have to stand and bend. It's just a little bit easier working in the raised bed. I love them. So this is this was COVID year because I had a lot more time to take pictures and things. So this was newly transplanted. They've probably been in there, not very long, a few days at the most. You can see there's a marigold at the beginning. There's some eggplant, little tiny eggplants that I grew, and some peppers. And then in the back is tomatoes. Look at the size of the tomatoes. Those I grow from seed. They're about, looks like about 8 inches high, pretty small. But when I'm doing transplants, like I said, you see the emitter hose going down into the bed itself. And what I do is, as I'm burying the emitter hose, I'm also checking where that hole is, where the water's going to come out. And that's right where I plant the individual plant. So the roots are right next to that hole. And it's about 2 inches deep for transplanting. And then you just smooth it all back up. But that way it really keeps the water from trying to shoot up out, especially if you had a soaker hose. It keeps the water down there by the roots. That's where you want it. You don't need it on the foliage. So what I do, before I actually do the transplanting, I get the whole length of that hose laid out, find out which plants I'm putting in, how much space they're going to need. Tomatoes, I have about a 2 foot, they're about 2 feet apart. And so then you're also checking where the hole is. Before you start planting any of that raised bed, check out all your spacing and get it all figured out. So this is newly germinated. And so this is a different type of hose. It's a soaker hose. It goes down the middle and then doubles back around. And there's actually 3 lines of soaker hose in that raised bed right there. So since it's a 22-foot long bed, it's probably a 75-foot piece of soaker hose. So I know you can't tell from the photo here, but what it is, because I keep my records so I can rotate my crops. The beginning end at the bottom of the slide here, that's chard. Then the little sticks, that's the change in what I'm growing. And the next group of things is the beets. And then beyond that little pink tag, that's where the lettuce is. Then there's radishes beyond that and carrots at the end. But so if I'm doing things direct with seed, I just need, you want the water going right where those seeds are at the level, and they're pretty close to the top. A lot of times they're only ½ inch or even 1/8 of an inch on like carrots. So you want the hose pretty high to the surface. I had a neighbor flag me down one day. They knew I was a master gardener. They said, oh, we got these raised beds. We have soaker hose in there and we put the carrots in there. We're watering like crazy. And they said nothing's germinating. So I was walking right past their house. So I just, as a friend, not as a master gardener, I went in and looked at the raised beds, and they had the soaker hose 4 inches deep. And so the seeds are only 1/8 of an inch deep for carrots, So here they are. Of course, the water wasn't getting down to the seeds or up to the seeds. So what we did is we just left everything in place and just took our fingers and lifted up the soaker hose. So it was only about an inch high, an inch below the soil surface. And then they had the water system still in place. And guess what? They germinated a couple weeks later. So that was kind of neat to be able to help them out with that. So you can see where the hose is, and see how the little germinated plants, I plant them on each side of the soaker hose and try to match the spacing that's described on the seed package, and definitely the depth. If they're too deep, they're not going to have enough energy to push up through there. If they're too shallow, sometimes they'll germinate and then just fall over. So you really need to pay attention to the depth and the spacing. And I think the hardest thing to watch the spacing on is carrots and lettuce. Lettuce is more forgiving. If you have it too close together, you just thin them out a little bit and eat the parts that you thinned out. Carrots, if you have them too close, you might not get hardly any carrots if you have them too close together, because it's a root crop. So in your garden, I recommend have at least some flowers. I usually put a few marigolds and sometimes sweet alyssum, but then also the plant in the foreground here, that's a big echinacea that gets about 4 foot high and wide, and the insects and the butterflies just love it. And it's enjoyable to watch, and it's fragrant too. So I really enjoy having that. And it's a perennial. It just dies back every year, and I trim it back, and it's been there since I had my raised bed, 7 years it's been there. I also wanted to point out in this picture the windbreak in the background on my fence. I didn't used to have that. I just had the open wire fence and a 6 foot high fence with the wood posts, and that kept the deer out. But in the high pressure time of the year when I'm gardening, I get my wind from the north and northeast, and it's every nice sunny day in the afternoon, there it is picking up in that direction. So what I did is I took this shade cloth stuff that you buy you can buy it by the foot, comes 6 foot wide, and then it's stapled up to the wood post. And then on the outside of the wire fence and against that shade cloth, there's wood pallets, and they're wired through to the metal fence and the poles. So that keeps the wind from blowing that around. But it's just incredible how much warmer that makes the gardening area. If you step away from the edge of that shade cloth, all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's a breeze out today. And it's just amazing how much more heat that generates. It doesn't block it totally like a piece of plastic. The air goes through it a little bit, but it definitely warms up that corner of the garden. And you don't need it towards the areas that the wind's not generally coming from. So this is going to be your site-specific stuff you need to go think about in your garden if you're allowed to have a fence, and then what kind of windbreak. I'm out in the open area where houses are we have no fencing restrictions per se. So this is the same picture of the bed that I showed earlier, the stuff that had just germinated. This is 3 weeks later, and it's filled in quite a bit. The chard at the lower part of the photo here, chard's there, then the beets, then the 2 different colors of lettuce and radishes. You probably can't see the carrots in the background, but the main thing is this is very easy to scoot along as these are growing up, and scoot along the edge and do your weeding. Keep up on the weeding. Anyway. These are the same tomato plants that were about 6 or 8 inches tall. And this is 3 weeks later also. Getting ready. I was getting ready to stake these up. One year I didn't stake my tomatoes. I thought, oh, they're pretty sturdy looking, I'll let them go. And once they had fruit on them and they were about 3 or 4 foot tall, and then you have a little wind, they can actually break the whole plant off. And that did happen to some damage. So I stake up all of mine, determinate and indeterminate, just because they can get so heavy laden with fruit that I don't want to break any of them. So when I put the raised beds in, first used them in 2016, I thought, oh, this will be very handy. I'll just put this one raised bed, do it all potatoes. So I put them in there, the same variety I've grown forever, and the same spacing, that kind of thing. And they actually were really poor quality, much smaller. And then it had a lot of grubs chewing on the potatoes because it was so much warmer than where I used to grow my potatoes that they just didn't tolerate it. Some things, like maybe a carrot, I don't see any difference. The carrots, when they were the way they grow, that were in the flat open area like the picture here, or compared to the raised bed, I didn't see any reduction in size or anything like that. But potatoes was the thing that was noticeable. So then I went ahead the next year, put potatoes back to where I used to grow them, that you see in the picture here. And it just needs to be cooler soil. Some things, like I said, can tolerate the more heat in the soil and some not. You just have to make your records, keep track of things, and make adjustments for the next year. So this is that same area of potatoes. It's about 25 feet long, this row, and I get about 60 to 80 pounds of potatoes. There's soaker hose down there buried. So you, like I said, this 10 to 15 degrees cooler, having the potatoes grown here down on the flat than in the raised bed. So the soaker hose, I dig a trench 6 to 8 inches deep, and then with the certified seed potatoes, space those out 12 to 15 inches apart, bury those down right up next to the hose, and then that's also on a timer also. But you can grow a lot of potatoes here. They do well in Central Oregon. And I eat potatoes from my garden all the way up through about mid-March, and then I run out. So here's just a picture of some pole beans in late August. It's supported with a T-post. You can see the tip of a T-post there, and just a piece of old fencing tied in between the T-posts with some wire or something like that. But this has got a soaker hose on each side of that T-post and the wire. And then on each side of the soaker hose, there's seeds planted. So when this is full development, this is kind of like a hedge of green pole beans. It's about 3 foot wide and hanging over the sides of the raised bed. And then I can, half of the time I'm picking, I'm just standing there. And it's very nice to be able to, you can sit kind of on the edge to get the ones lower down while you're pawing through there, trying to find the pole beans, and then stand up part of it. And you save a lot of space. I mean, I know some people like bush beans because then they don't have to stake them, but you get more quantity by doing pole beans and staking them up, and you're not sprawling all over the place. If you didn't stake up pole beans, they would be out on the ground and then you wouldn't be able to walk through it, things like that. So any of my things that are hard seeds, I soak them one night before I sow them. Not 2 nights or more, one night. If you let them in, leave them in the water in a little dish on your kitchen counter or whatever, more than one day, then they'll start to fall apart and then they'll never be able to germinate. They're done. So that, like I said, the seeds are planted on both sides of the soaker hose that is buried, and the soaker hose goes down one side of that fencing piece and back the other side. And then when I'm waiting for the germination to take place, I top water until everything's germinated. So I have the soaker hose going, but I really want to make sure every day they're getting the seed is getting moisture, so it's going to start to break out of its shell and open up. Once everything's germinated, then I don't usually do much top watering. But anyway, one thing nice about beans that aren't hybrid or anything, then the last time I harvest, then I just quit harvesting the beans, let some of the beans be over mature and ripe, not picking them, and you wait till they're rattle dry, meaning they turn yellow, the seeds are still all inside the pod itself, and then use those same seeds for next year. Let them dry thoroughly, put them in the garage or shed, and then plant them. I've carried over those same seeds for, I don't know, 10 years or more. So here's some corn. We usually have one whole 22-foot long bed of corn. The emitter hose is on both sides of the bed. It goes down one side, turns around and comes back the other end. These seeds are also any of the seeds that are hard like a little rock. That would be peas, pea pods, green beans, pole beans, corn. I even soak beet seeds now too. They're just a really hard seed, and they'll just germinate a little bit quicker. So the corn seeds are spread out along, according to the spacing that's on the package, the depth and the spacing, whatever's recommended for that variety, on each side. So the thing with corn, you want to plant it in a block. That's why there's actually 4 rows of corn the whole length of this bed. So because they have to pollinate from the male part of the plant, the tassel stuff at the top, down to each where the silk is on the corn, the ear itself. So it's wind pollinated, and if you had one single row 100 feet long, that corn probably would not even get pollinated because the wind's going every which way. And the thing with planting in a block shape like this, you're getting whichever way the wind's going that day, that time of day, it's going to get pollinated. And same like the other pole beans or bush beans, I would top water until I see germination. Now my corn, I used to grow that out on the flat, and sometimes it would take 2 weeks, 17 days, 20 days to germinate because the soil's so much cooler. The first year I put the corn in the raised bed, 2016, I had germination starting within 4 days. To me, that's just an amazing difference to have successful corn growing. Here's the raised beds are full. You can see all kinds of different stuff. There's chard there, beets, carrots in the very back left corner. The broccoli is there under that little shade thing I built. There's lettuce under that little piece of row cover. Then that's attached to a little structure I made for pea pods. And the whole reason I did that was that when I put the cool season crops like broccoli and cabbage, I put them in the raised beds, they didn't do very well. They had a lot of foliage, but they didn't develop the terminal head or as much lateral heads, either one. So what I figured is I'm thinking that the soil was just a little too warm for them. So as soon as I get the transplants in and they're established and they're, a week or 2 later, then I put the sage, the shade cloth up there. It's just on some T-posts and some piece of wood and tied on there with string and stapled or whatever, I don't know. But it just, at the middle of the day when the sun's coming directly down on that bed, it's the hottest part of the day, then it's actually adding a little shade and making it just a little bit cooler. And it seems to help a little bit. I've done this about 3 years now, and it seems to be beneficial to have those cooler season crops a little cooler. And down to the lower right, that's the edge of the potato patch. The ones you saw earlier. And back to the fence, you can see the fencing in the back, that's still in place. Okay, that's the end of the photos. These are the links that you'll be sent. Growing vegetables in Central Oregon, the crop rotation, and general gardening information. We have all kinds of great publications there. You can just browse through all that, and or also you can go to the Redmond OSU Extension Service office and pick up in person. Some of them are printed publications, are very nice to have besides just the paper copy handouts. So thank you for attending our class, and I think we're about ready for question and answer.
We are, and I want to let the audience know you don't need to jot these links down. They will be sent to you in the email that comes after the webinar is over. So you don't need to be scurrying to do that. We will send them to you. So Vicky, you've got several questions. Jan was good enough to answer a few during the session about hardware cloth and about where you could get wood chips. So thank you, Jan, for responding to those. You've got, I want to make sure that we get to everybody, but you have a lot of questions when you were showing the soaker hoses and the emitter hoses. And maybe you could expand a little bit on that, because here's some of the questions. They want to know if does a soaker hose spray the water or just drip it? Do you bury it? And another companion question is how deep to bury it. Does it cause the emitter hose, if you bury it, does it clog the holes? Can you bury soaker hoses like you did emitter hoses? And what's the difference between using an emitter versus a soaker?
Okay.
So
Let's
they're all
start.
sort of related.
Okay. The emitter hose, like I said, the ones I have, the holes are about 12 inches apart. So what happens when the water is turned on, because of the timer that I'm using and the gate is open in that raised bed, then the water just pushes out the hole. But what it's got this little valve on each hole that when the water's not flowing out, because the timer says it's done with the timing, then it actually closes up that little hole. So dirt does not go back in that hole, which is really pretty cool. Which is totally different than the soaker hose. The soaker hose, it just oozes out the whole length of the hose in little droplets. And what I do on, what happens, you can have a brand new soaker hose and it has pinholes. So that's why I got into the habit of burying the soaker hose. I used to just lay it on top, but then you'd have a pinhole and it'd shoot that water up and out about 3 foot off to the side. There's no reason to be watering out there in the walking pathway. So that's why I decided, well, I just bury them all the time, and I do. And that seems to resolve those little pinholes that you get. Now, the depth of it, I bury both of the types, soaker hose and emitter, 1 to 2 inches. And that's going to depend on what I'm growing. If I'm transplanting transplants like a tomato plant, then I would put either type of hose 2 inches deep. Because when you transplant, you want the water right there where next to the roots so they can absorb that water immediately. Now, if you're doing some direct seeds like carrots and lettuce and radishes, you want the water right where that seed is. And a lot of times that's right there, right below the surface. So that's why if I'm doing direct seed, I only go 1 inch deep on that raised bed.
Okay.
Does that make sense? What, did I miss anything else on?
No, I'm going through. People have gotten very busy with asking questions, so
Okay.
I'm going to also ask Jan to chime in here if she feels there's something that's being missed. But there were a bunch of things about the soaker hoses. I'm just going to go from the top right now because a lot of the questions came in the order in which you were doing your slides. Laurel asked if the mulch around the bed increases the fire danger because she lives in a rural area.
No, I would say no, it's not considered because it's not upright. So you're not going to carry a big fire on whether it's bark mulch or the shredded juniper you see. But beyond my garden, beyond the shredded bark, yeah, I clear out some of the brush so it's not right up next to my garden. It also keeps the weeds from getting in by having that separation area. The thing with a shredded juniper, it's I live in Crook County, and they have the neighborhood I'm in, since it's low density housing area. It's considered a higher risk for fire. So what they do is, if you want to cut your junipers down or have a contractor cut them down, they'll shred it right in place, and you can either keep the shredded juniper or they take it away for you, as long as their shredder can get to wherever your pile of juniper is. But it's funded, that program is funded intermittently in Crook County through FEMA, Federal Emergency Management. And so you just have to check on that. I mean, it's nice to be able to get it for free, but if it was done in Crook County, they're probably not going to haul it to your house if you're in Redmond or Bend or something. So
well, since you're talking about juniper, if I can just quick interrupt you, one person wanted to know if it has any pest repellent properties.
No, I've never heard of any research that there is.
Okay. Moving along. So you had talked about using the cedar from your deck to build your beds.
Yes.
And Alice wants to know, how did you get rid of the finish from the deck, if you did have finish on it, which can be a contaminant if you're growing vegetables?
Yeah, the thing with we used to treat that deck every year. We get, and it was new wood when we put it in there in '93, but then gradually it wouldn't even hold the treatment anymore to kind of keep it waterproof. So we gradually didn't use anything. So probably 5 years in a row, there was no treatment on it. So we considered it untreated in that sense, that it's basically weathered off.
Okay. Kathleen wants to know how you keep tree roots from taking over your raised beds.
Well, I don't have any trees that close to my raised bed, so that's something you'd want to consider if you have a limited options for, the only thing you could do would be dig down and cut off the tree root. Well, you might be, limiting the life of that tree if you did that. So, I would recommend not have raised beds any closer than 10 feet at the closest to your raised beds.
So you don't interfere with the tree roots.
Right.
Okay. So Dawn wants to know, how deep do your raised beds need to be so you do not need to use hardware cloth underneath? Now, Janet was kind enough to answer another question about what hardware cloth was, but this one is there a way to avoid it by making the beds a certain depth?
Well, like the beds you saw in the pictures, those are 18 inches approximately. And I've never had anything come up from the bottom in those beds. And I do have voles and gophers in my yard right outside the garden fence. But in the demonstration garden in Redmond, right there at the OSU Extension Service, we have raised beds that are 18 inches tall. And yes, they did come up from the bottom in there. And so we took all the soil out, put the hardware cloth in, which is, it's like wire things with holes that are about 1/4 inch or so, just a tiny little hole, 1/4 inch or smaller than 1/2 inch, so the rodents can't get through it. And we lined the whole bottom, and then they couldn't get in from the bottom. So it's time consuming, but it's amazing how deep they can dig. Definitely would have an issue if you had shallow raised beds that are 8 or 12 inches. They definitely would be wanting to go up through that.
Okay. Well, a bunch of people want to know if there are local businesses where they can get irrigation supplies. And I know there are some policies.
Yeah, there's all kinds of specialty places too. especially some of the nurseries, Instant Land, say they have a really good supply of stuff, but there's also specialty irrigation places. Some of the stuff we use, we just get at Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that. You just have to kind of shop around and see what you want. But you know, especially the places that specialize in irrigation supplies, they're the people that work there, they're very knowledgeable and they like to help you. And they'll even help you evaluate, well, this costs more, but this works better. Things like that, like on your timers and all your connection pieces for your soaker hose and emitters and main line. They'll help you make those decisions.
Okay. A couple more questions about hoses. A couple of people want to know if there are reasons why you would use an emitter hose as opposed to a soaker hose, and then do you pull them out every fall?
I don't take them out anymore. I just leave them there on top. I brush the dirt off with my hand with a glove on, so it's not caked on there all winter long. But I don't store them in the shed or anything like that. The main thing is that if you're doing direct seed, soaker hose is probably a little more efficient because it's a continuous oozing of the whole length of that hose. That's probably better soaker hose, but like I say, they're not as durable. But so I do grow some stuff by seed that's with the emitter. And so I'm thinking about every time, where am I putting that seed? Is how far away is it from, if the emitter hose has 12 inches apart, then I got to be thinking, if it's corn, you probably get away with it. You just make sure, because your spacing on a corn seed is so far apart that you can stay pretty close to that hole still on the emitter hose with 12 inches apart for the hole. Now, if you're doing something like radishes where you put your seeds about 1 inch apart and you have emitter hose, then I would be concerned that your water's going to get all along all the seeds.
Okay, so along those lines, there are a couple of people who are confused just a little bit, that if you're burying emitter hoses, and what they're confused about is when you were referring to top watering seeds, and how you actually do that if you're burying the hoses.
Should I go back to some pictures?
I think that would be very helpful, yes, to show people, because that might answer some more of the questions, because we've got, let me just look here, because there were a bunch of questions about the hoses, and that emitter hose for transplants and soaker for seeds.
Okay.
And I think you just started answering that question, and also people want to know, Vicky, if they're 1/4 or 1/2 inch hoses.
Oh, I think they're that emitter hose in the picture right there. You can see the picture, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think they're 1/2 inch.
Okay. And
So-
then the one, Michelle said emitter hose for transplants and soaker for seeds. And you started already answering that about why you would use one versus the other and when you would use them.
See, the thing with, if you had, if you were planting this bed right here, and the holes on that emitter hose are 12 inches apart, that would work fine for doing like tomato plants and peppers and eggplant, because you're going to spread those out about that far anyway. So then when you go to plant, like here, this one that's planted now, each of those plants are next to one of those holes in the emitter hose. So they're 1 or 2 feet apart, depending on what plant I have there. So the eggplant down at the very lower end of the picture, they're pretty small plants, so they're probably each at a different hole, 12 inches apart. And where that marigold is, and then the probably alternated on the peppers that are next beyond that, and the eggplant. But then when I get back to the top end of this photo here, those are tomato plants, and they're probably 2 feet apart because the hole in the emitter hose are 12 inches apart. So every other hole, that's where a plant went. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay,
I think so. So,
so here's the difference than this. See the soaker hose, then you just plant continuous. This is the stuff you do direct seed, like that, the chard, the beets, the lettuce, the radishes, that kind of planting direct seed, and it's continuous is works a little more efficient with a soaker hose. So you could make adjustments and then change hoses in different beds year to year if you wanted to rotate your crops, and you're going from a bed that's transplants compared to a bed that has direct seed sowing.
okay. Let me see if there are any more about that, because having the pictures and having the having you recycle back to that, it's been pretty helpful. So Michelle, you were talking at one point in time about staking the stalks, and I believe it was with the tomatoes or the I can't remember which vegetable.
These tomatoes that I talked about, yeah.
Yeah. So what the question is, do you stake right next to the stalk?
Actually, what I do is I have these little pieces of fences, like I had on the beanpole, and what it is, it's just a piece of fence they're in a round cylinder, about 18 inches diameter, and they're just hooked together. It's way cheaper than buying tomato cages, and they're much sturdier. So what I do, sorry, I don't have a picture of that, but I put the cylinder, and they go up they're about 3 foot tall. So I center it over the top of the tomato plant. And then on each side of that cylinder of the fencing material, then I pound in a wood stake into the raised bed soil. And then I wire the wood post to the metal fencing piece. And then the tomato plant just grows up the middle of it. But you can use tomato cages. I use some, they're just not as sturdy for when the plants get really big. When the tomato plants are full grown and I'm still harvesting out there, they're taller than I am. They're 6 foot tall. And so, those little tomato cages, they normally don't go up very high. They're just not as sturdy.
Okay.
You can use them, especially for cherry tomatoes.
Okay. Let's see. People are struggling with the whole hose thing. So I hate to keep focusing on that, but Michael still doesn't understand the term top water.
Oh, okay.
And Jennifer wants to know if you're rotating crops from year to year, do you need to move the soaker and emitter hoses from bed to bed as you rotate crops from year to year? So maybe you can put this to bed and explain, because there's still confusion about that.
So when I'm waiting for the germination to happen, even if I have that soaker hose running, turned on, water's flowing through there, whatever time I set and whatever days, I want to make sure that all day long, there's moisture in that top layer of soil. So what I'll do is I'll have the timer's on, the water's flowing once or twice a day in that soaker hose in that bed. And then I also take another hose independent with just a regular old nozzle, garden nozzle on it. And I just walk up and down the bed itself and top water it on the top. And then I check it. I put my finger down in there and see how deep that water's going and make sure that wherever the seeds are, whatever depth and spacing, that the water's getting down to where the seeds are. So any of the stuff that I am growing direct by seed, like the peas, the beans, this stuff here in this picture, the chard, the beets, lettuce, corn, any of that stuff direct seed, I top water for, until it looks like it's germinating nicely. Once it's germinated, then the roots are active and they're going down, they're going way down. They're not just staying at the surface where the soaker hose is. So they're going down below, like say the corn, like I said, it starts germinating in a raised bed here. Within about 4 days, the first of it pops up and then it's just going straight down, and they have pretty deep roots.
Okay. Speaking about depth, There is a question about, can raised beds be deeper? Yours were 18 inches, is that right?
Yeah, I don't think there's that many crops that you would be growing that would be deeper unless you're having perennials in there, like some berries or something. But most cases, 18 inches is as deep as you're going to need for annuals that you're growing.
Okay. Let me just do.
The thing with having the deeper beds, it's easier to plan your rotation because you're rotating by families. So the things that are in one family group that is most commonly grown is tomatoes, peppers, eggplant,
Okay.
that kind of thing. So what I do is I just make sure I rotate those all in that same family, rotate it to bed number 2 the next year. Then the next year that goes to bed number 3, and then on and on like that. But also I keep records of it with a little piece of graph paper, you know, a 1/4 inch on the graph paper is 1 foot. And it's really easy to track it from year to year, bed to bed. So I'm not growing anything in the same bed, the same thing in that family group of that type for at least 3 years. I have enough room I can rotate it and not have that issue. And that rotation is all about, you know, insects and disease. They like their certain specific hosts, plant hosts. And so they'll tend to, you'll have less insect and disease problems if you rotate your crops.
Okay, so since you spoke about and showed your potato plants, that of course has prompted a few questions about potatoes. And one of the questions is, what type of potato do you grow? And how would you please share how you store your potatoes so they're still edible in
Oh,
March?
okay. Well, I usually grow Yukon Gold and red Potomac. There's several varieties that I, you know, other ones I've done the fingerling ones. I really like them, but they're small, and so they're more tedious when you go to harvest. So what I do is I try to do it when I'm ready to harvest. This is not ready to harvest. So what happens is this is when they just started. They've been in there about a month or so. Yeah, month and a half. This would be a good several months in. So what they'll grow up about 2 to 3 feet tall, and they're still green. And then they've flowered. There's a little flower in the lower right-hand corner. And then what'll happen is all of a sudden they start flopping over, and they spread out a little bit into the walkway. But you just leave them there, don't do anything. And then eventually they turn brown and they're just laying on the ground flat. So that's when you can start testing for, just poke your fingers into the top edge of the soil and see if you can feel a potato. And if it is, pull it out, check it out, eat it, whatever. But anyway, what I do is I dig the whole thing out, start at one end. Once I'm ready to harvest the whole thing, it's died back. The potatoes are just underground. Then I gradually do it all by hand, sitting down there, because if I use a tool, I always damage too many potatoes, and then I'm upset because I hit them with the tool. So anyway, I just dig with my hands in gloves and take each potato out and brush all the dirt off with my hand and just set it on the mulch and let it air dry there for at least a couple hours, and just work my way. You know, I don't have to do it all in one day. I can just work a 5-foot segment of this, and then another day do another 5-foot segment, but take them all out, let them air dry. You don't want a bunch of wet soil on there. You don't want to wash them off either with water. Just let them air dry. And then after you've had them air dried for 2 or 3 hours, depending on what temperature the day is and how fast they're drying, then you brush them off one more time and make sure they're really dry. If they need to be out a little longer to be dry on that surface, that's okay. Let them stay out there. Sometimes I've put them in a wheelbarrow and then put them out in the sun for a while and then let them dry a little more. But eventually I put them in an apple box. So you have the box with the lid and the handles on the side, but I put them in there once they're all dry. and wherever the holes are for the handles for the box, put duct tape over that. And then I stick that box into the garage and put about an inch thick pad of old newspapers on top of the box. And they just sit on the floor of my garage. My garage isn't heated, it's insulated though. And then they just sit there, and it's fairly cool throughout the winter. So you don't want them you don't want light on them, and you don't want them near like apples. You don't want them near a box of apples because that will try to ripen up the potatoes, and you don't want that. So that's how I store mine in the garage. And like I said, this row I get 60 pounds or 80, maybe if I'm lucky, and they last all the way into March.
Okay. So another attendee wanted to know, do you amend the soil where you have your potatoes to improve native sandy soil?
No, they don't like much nutrition. One year, my husband, he got overzealous and got a little too much in the potatoes, and they had nice green because they liked all that nitrogen, but the potatoes weren't near as productive. They like sandy soil. They like it to be well drained, and my soil, I don't know if you could tell from that other picture, that's very sandy. There's not much in there. We put a little bit in the fall. We put in some grass clippings and lightly till that in the fall, and it just kind of melts away over the winter time. But you don't want to put too much in with potatoes.
Okay. Well, the grass is a good segue to another question that we had, and that's from Christy. How do you keep grass out of your beds?
I do all the hand weeding, but you know, if you keep on top of it throughout the growing season, and then you like I have shown in the picture, that mulch keeps the weeds down too. But I still got to dig down through that mulch and pull them out, as they kind of hide in there sometimes too. But it's a priority for me. If I have weedings in my landscaping and I got weeding in my garden, I go to my garden first every time.
Okay. All right. Just a few more questions coming up. First of all, Rebecca says, wow, impressive seeing those full beds in full growth. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
For that.
Great.
Laurel wants to know if harvested seeds can stay in an outbuilding with no heat during the winter. Because you had talked about harvesting your seeds.
Yeah, that's where I keep mine. The main thing is I keep the seeds on my pole beans and my peas. Peas are that thing right next to that white piece of row cover, the pea pods. Just like the pole beans I described, you let the really big ones at the end of the harvesting season, when you're about done harvesting, you let some of them just naturally dry on the plant itself. And then I pick them off and then make sure they're really dry. I put them in like a little pie pan, a metal pie pan that's open. And I just tape a little note saying what kind of seed it is and the date that I harvested the seeds from the pod itself. And then I just stick that in a tray in my garden shed that's, it doesn't have any openings. There's no rodents or anything that get in there. And so they just sit there all winter long. They actually like that cool temperature to overwinter, just to sit there like that.
Okay. So Karen wants to know how you protect corn from rodents.
Well, you're just going to have to be creative. You know, if you have burrowing rodents, you're talking about that, you might have to put like the hardware cloth we talked about at the bottom of the raised bed, but also something up the sides that would exclude the size rodent that you're talking about. You just have to be creative. Go to the hardware store. They have some of the wiring stuff that you can use that's in little rolls that's 2 or 3 feet wide and 20 to 25 feet, 50 feet long, and you can cut it up and do different things and wire it together. But you just have to check out what's available. And that kind of stuff would be kind of heavy for shipping. So you probably want to buy it in person at either one of the big box stores or some nursery or something like that.
Okay. Just a couple more questions. We're plowing through because you've had over 40 questions. I just want you to know that.
Okay.
Sherry wants to know if the hoses and the shut off valves that you were showing, are they Rainbird products or are they something else?
I have no idea. My
Okay.
husband does the irrigation. He's the irrigation person.
So my understanding is that any irrigation place would be able to make good recommendations, and it's not necessarily the manufacturer. It's about what your specific needs are for your bed. So.
Right. And I would recommend if you have existing beds, take pictures of it, take measurements, write that all down, and then jot down what you think you want to do, and then explain that to the person in the store,
Right.
and they can help you make decisions. And like I said, there's so much variety. I couldn't even list it all to you.
Well,
So
and
you
we're
really-
also not in a position where we are, the master gardeners don't make recommendations for specific
Yeah.
manufacturers or locations, because that's just not something that we would do. But there's plenty of information online where you can make that decision that's pertinent for your particular situation.
Yeah, and same with the micro sprays and all that stuff. I mean, there's tons of variety, and you just have to go. It's just like a little puzzle, how they fit together, what size they are, how durable they are.
Right. So another attendee says that they use a drip line with 6-inch hole spacing on either side of a row to provide coverage. Do you have any comments about that? Is that a good practice? Does that work? Any suggestions?
Oh, that should work fine. Yeah. In fact, when I look at my pictures, our emitter hoses, they're 12 inches apart on the hole. I would recommend something closer together if I did it over again. But since this is what we got, they're still working okay, I just go with that. But the closer they are together, it is going to be easier when you're doing continuous seeding along that hose, like your lettuce and stuff.
So Vicky, I'm not sure if this is the slide or not, but someone wanted you to show the pic of the irrigation connections near the beginning of the class. Is this towards the beginning of the slide presentation? Yeah, I think it was, they want to see the connections. That was towards the.
Okay, this is the riser going into the raised bed.
Okay.
This is the riser going underneath the board that hooks to the hose itself with the cutoff valve. This is the main line coming out of the ground, that main line, the metal at the top of this picture, that goes back to the house. And so at this connection here where I have the timer, and the tubing that is a 1/2 inch, and it goes underneath the fence itself and into the raised bed area. The other gated Y up on the right hand corner, there's no hose attached to it, but that's the hose that goes out to my greenhouse.
Okay.
Or just regular yard.
And I think you might have answered this, but I kept it open because I wasn't completely sure, since we had so many questions about you don't need to move the soaker and emitter hoses from bed to bed as you rotate the crops, correct? You just leave them?
No, you don't need to, because, but you could if you wanted to, but then you might have to get a different adapter where you hook the main line onto the hose itself of which type it is, because they have a different fitting. So you might have to think about that.
Okay. Well, that's the end of our questions. So I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen, Vicky.
Me? Okay.
Yes, please, so that I can share mine. And for our participants, since we still have several people on.
I lost my cursor.
Well, that's okay. I'm gonna do it for you. Don't worry. There you go. I think I just stopped you. So for our participants, I want to say thank you from the Central Oregon Master Gardener Association and OSU Extension for participating. Thank you for all of the questions. They were all wonderful. We can't see Jan right now since she's got her video off, but she has been wonderful behind the scenes, helping to answer the questions, and your feedback really matters to us. So after we're finished today, you will get an email. You should get an email with a link to the recording. And if you do not get that email, please reach out. There's an email address on the registration page. It's seminar@goconga.com to let us know if there's a problem with your email and that you're not getting things. Please fill out the survey. It's very helpful to us to know how we're doing, and we want to make sure that we are addressing your needs as our community of gardeners here in Central Oregon. And just thank you. These webinars this year have been a major, major success, and we are getting a lot of really good feedback from you. And we really appreciate your participation, and we appreciate all of our sponsors who have helped us with that. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share, and I am going to end and want to say thank you. And if any of you have anything else you want to add, go for it before I click the red button.
I can't hear you, Jan.
We have, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
5 more questions. Oh, a
Yes,
couple of
we
other
had-
things.
We had one of our students in the class ask whether there is a way for them to view all of the questions that have been asked and the answers, rather than only the questions that they asked personally.
I'm looking at that, and let's see. Give me 2 seconds, because that should have been enabled. So let me see. Actually, they are already set to see all questions and be able to upvote. That's already there. So there's, if they check on.
So everyone should be able to see all the questions and all the
Yes.
answers. in the
Yes,
Q&A.
they should. So there are a couple of different tabs. You should see the answered questions. And if you go to answered questions, the settings that I'm looking at right now is that all attendees are able to see all questions and can upvote on anybody's question. And I did see that happening. So it may be a setting on the person's end on their computer, but our settings are allowing everybody to see all the questions. So Michael, I see that question from you, and I'm not really sure what the problem is, because we had a lot of people upvoting questions that weren't there. So I think that's all I can say for right now. And Vicky, a lot of people are saying thank you for showing your pictures and taking the time. And Kim says this is the most helpful class so far, which
good.
is wonderful. So, and so if you go to the Q&A, as long as I have this webinar open, you can see these questions, but once I end it, they will go away. And
Thank you guys for doing this for me.
so this is great. So everyone, thank you so much. And Michael, I hope that you are able to see the tabs now. There should be a tab in your Q&A window that says answered. And if you click on that tab, you would be able to see all the rest of the questions for people. So with that, ladies, smile. I don't know if Chris Norchild's trying to take a photograph of us, but here we are.
The screen. That's right.
This is her chance. Okay, folks, thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of this beautiful April day. And it's not too late to sign up for this afternoon's weed session. You can do that up to 12:30. And next week in the morning, it's going to be all about greenhouses. Amy Jo Detweiler is doing a session that's not just about construction, but she's also going to do a piece on management. And then the afternoon session, Professor Gail Longalotto from OSU is going to talk all about bugs. And this woman breathes, loves, just her whole life. She's an entomologist and her whole life is about bugs. It is going to be so totally worth it because you need to know who the good guys are in your garden as well as the bad guys. Not too late to sign up for those sessions either. You can do that all the way up until next Saturday. So thank you. And we love our gardening community, and we're going to say goodbye.
All right, bye.
Okay, bye, guys.